As a demonstration of the power of the technique we've used here, creating model classes and then abstracting the management of those model classes into a data layer, we're going to add a new feature to our application, and we'll see exactly how this makes it relatively straightforward and easy to do. So let's add a feature that allows us to delete events from our applications. So down at the bottom of my event controller, I'm going to create some space. And so I'm going to do two things. The first thing I'm going to do is create a handler form that our handler method that just displays the form that we'll be using. So let me make get mapping, and we'll put this at the URL /events/delete. Recall I have events up at the top here in my request mapping. And then we'll say this is a public string, and we'll say render or display delete event form. And we're going to need to pass some data into the template, so we're going to need a model in our method signature. Recall that just by putting that in our signature, Spring Boot will make sure our method gets called with a model object. And again, this is a different model from, it's sort of confusing, this is a different model from the model that we're sort of referring to when we talk about the M in MVC, which for us now is this event class. So different model, a little confusing, but you can probably keep them straight. Okay, so what do we want to do here? We want to basically just render a form. So let's return the name of a template, and we'll say events.delete. We don't have this template yet, but we'll make it in a moment. What else do we need to do? We need a title for our page. So I'll say model.add attribute, title, and delete events. And then in order to render a form that deletes events, we're going to need to know what the events actually are. So we need to pass in a collection of events. And we're going to do that. We're going to call that attribute events, and then we're going to say event data .getAll, which gives us a collection that we can loop over in the template. Because essentially what we want to do is create a form that has a bunch of checkboxes, one for each event, and then the user can select which events they want to delete by selecting the relevant checkboxes. Okay, so that looks good. Let's go ahead and make this template now. Let's go over to Project Pane, and we're going to go down below to Resources, Templates, and within Events, I'm going to right-click and say New Time Leaf. I'm going to call this delete.html. Okay, and I do want to add that to version control. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we just want to drop in the fragments that we've been using in other templates. So I'm just going to go to my create template and copy paste these. So actually what I want here, I need all three of these lines. I want the head fragment, I want my body with class container, and I want the header navigation stuff. So I'm just going to copy these three lines and go replace the relevant code in the delete template. Okay, and I think that'll do it. That's really the only fragments we're using. They're all at the top there. So I can now close out of my create template, and now I need to create a form. So let's do that. Let's say form method equals post. Remember, you're almost always going to use post when working with forms. And it's essentially a best practice to do it anytime you're changing data. And so now we're going to be deleting data from the server, quote unquote server. We're going to be deleting data from the application. We don't have a database yet, but we're going to be deleting the data from the application, and that's destructive. That is actually changing data, so we want to make sure that we're posting. Okay, and we're going to use the same pattern we did before. I'm not going to put an action on here because I'm actually going to have this form post to the same endpoint at which it lives. In other words, it's going to post to /events/delete, which is kind of what we did when we added the form to create events. So I don't need to add an action since it's going to post to the same URL at which the form is displayed. Okay, so within my form, let's do the easy part first. Let's make a button. So I'm going to go to the bottom, input, type equals submit, and let's say value equals, remember value is the text that displays on the button. I'm going to say delete. And then I want to add my bootstrap classes. So it's that button. Every button gets BTN. And then the other class I want to add is the customization class, the one that sort of determines the color of the button. In this case, since I'm doing something destructive, let's make a red button. So that is the BTN-danger class. Okay, so that's the easy part. Now I need to render all of the checkboxes for my form. So let's see what we're going to do. I'm going to put those within a form group. So let me put a div class equals form group. And then within that, I want to make a loop. And so let's say, let's say th::block, th::each, and then I'm going to say events in, or colon rather, events. So this will loop over the event collection that's passed in. And for each one of these, I want to create an input. So I'm going to actually have a label and an input. So let's do the label first. And that'll wrap the input. The text I want on my label is just going to be the name of the event. So let me make a span. That's a little container that I can put the text in. So say span with th::text equals, and this is going to be events.name. Okay, and so that'll just be a little span, a little container that has the event name as the label. And then now I need the input, which is a checkbox. So let's say input type equals checkbox. And I need a few things here. The first thing I need to do is to give this input a name. Remember, name is going to be the label that the data is submitted to the server under. And so I'm going to call this event IDs. And why it's plural will become more clear when we go to write the controller code. But essentially, every input, every checkbox is going to have the same ID, the same name. And so therefore, what's submitted to the server is actually going to be a collection of IDs rather than just a single ID. So that's why we made that plural. Okay, so I need that. I need a value. And the value is going to be the data that's submitted if the checkbox is selected. So what should this be? To delete an event, what do we need to know? If we go back to our event data class, we see that we have this remove method, which takes an event and removes it from the collection, and that requires the ID of the event. So we need to be able to know the ID in order to remove it. So let's make this a th::colon value, and then within that we can put event.id. And so what that does is it'll make the value or the data that's submitted if the checkbox is selected to be the same as the event ID, which is all we really need to know. We don't need to know the name or the description or anything like that. Since the ID is unique, that gives us an easy way to know exactly which event should be deleted. Okay, and let's see. One more thing we need is our bootstrap class. So let's say class equals form dash control. Let's see, that looks pretty good. Let me just look over it one more time here. Okay, I'm happy with this. Let's go ahead and run our code and see if our form is displayed correctly. All right, so refresh. All our data is going to go away. Go to create events, and I'll just create a couple. Same events I've been using again and again because I'm lazy and I don't want to type. Okay, so I have my events now. I have 2 events. I want to see if I can delete them. Well, it's not easy to get to the delete event page because we didn't put a nav link. We'll have to do that later. Let me have, we'll just have to go straight to the URL and say events/delete. Okay, and so now we do indeed see checkboxes, and if we click on the labels, those checkboxes are checked and unchecked. If I hit delete here, nothing's going to happen because I have not created the controller method to handle that. One other thing I want to fix here, these don't look that great, and I think the reason why is that I put the form group around the entire thing. I probably want to go ahead and put the form group inside of this loop. Let's do that. And that should render each checkbox and label on a different line, and that should look a little bit nicer. Okay, so make that improvement. Stop the application, and then the other improvement we want to make before moving on is adding this to our navigation. So that will be in our fragments file, and I want to basically have just another nav link. So I'm going to copy paste my create event and modify it accordingly. So it's going to be the href for this one should be /events/delete, and then the text should be delete events. Now let's implement the post handler for our form. So we'll go back to event controller, and down below at the very bottom of the class, we'll make some room and we'll make a post mapping. And we want this to be the same path as the method that renders the form. So we'll put delete as the value of our post mapping, and then let's make a public string. And I'm going to follow the same sort of naming style I've used above. So when I created a post handler for the create event form, I called it process create event form. Let me call this one process delete events form. Okay, and so what do we need here? We need to know which IDs have been submitted in the form. The way we get data out of the form is by having a request parameter. So let me say at request param. What should the data type of this be? Well, we know the IDs are integers, and since we, in our form, if we look back at our template here, we gave them all the same name, they're going to be submitted in a collection or a list of IDs. So I can make this actually an int array, and I'll call that event IDs. Recall it's important that this parameter name is the same as the name attribute of the form element that I gave it over in the template. Okay, so within this, I want to loop over this collection of IDs. So let's say for int ID in event IDs. And then within that loop, I want to remove the event from my collection. So I'm going to say event data.remove and pass it the ID for that specific iteration. And then when I'm done, what should I do? Similar to the what we did above when we created a new event, we want to redirect back to the event listing. So we're going to return redirect. And that should be in quotes. Okay. So notice we're leaving this. What's normally after the colon there is a path, relative path to the controller you're in. Since we want to go to the index endpoint of the path of the controller we're in, we're just going to leave that spot empty. So that's why it looks kind of funny. Redirect colon. Okay, and if I did everything correctly, that should do the trick. Let's start our application and see how we did. Okay, so I'm going to go back and go to my all events, and let's see, that looks okay. So I need to create some first. One event, and to really test this, I could just test it with one, but I really want to test that I can delete more than one at the same time. So let's create a couple. And I also want to test that only the selected events are deleted. So I actually want a third, so they can have maybe 2 selected and 1 unselected. So let's make a third. And let's say spring 1. Pivotal are the folks that make Spring, maintain Spring Boot, so they have a conference called Spring 1 Platform each year. All right, I've got 3 events now, and I notice I do have my delete events nav link up there, so I can just click on that. This doesn't look great, but I'm not really concerned with the layout of this right now. Ideally, these would be kind of on the same line. So we should fix that eventually, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. I just want to test the functionality. So if I come in here and select one of these and hit delete, we go back to the index, which is what we wanted, and notice that that event with ID 1, the WWDC event, is no longer there. Let's create it again. Although this will be a different object with a different ID. It'll have ID 4 now. Let's go to delete and see if we can delete more than one at the same time. So I'm going to delete WWDC and Spring 1. And that indeed worked. So maybe the only final test case I might do is go to this and submit it without any events selected. Okay, and that should work too. And this is actually an error. So this is something that we should handle. And this is basically saying that this request param is not passed in because there weren't any event IDs. So the way we can do that And so in order to do that, let's go ahead and stop the server. And what we need to do is introduce a new parameter for the request param annotation. And that is we can put required equals false here. otherwise required with the D there we go. Otherwise required is going to be true, and Spring will not map our request to this handler method because it doesn't, if it's submitted without anything checked, because this won't exist in the request. So this will now allow this method to be called without any event IDs, which is what we want in the case that someone hits the delete button without selecting any of the checkboxes. But now it's possible for this object to be null. So we need to guard against referring to that object in the case that it's null by wrapping our for loop with a null check. Let's say if event IDs is not equal to null. Okay, so now if someone does check a box, this check will pass and we'll loop through the array of event IDs. If someone does not check a box and the event IDs is null, we won't do that, and we'll avoid a null pointer exception here. All right, let's restart and see if that does the trick. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my /events path. Need to create an event. I only need to create one here. I'm just going to be sloppy about this. And I'm going to go to delete, and now I'm going to hit the delete button without selecting anything. There we go. That's exactly what we wanted to happen. All right, so that's how we did it. So we added some functionality here, just to recap, that allows us to delete an event, and it was relatively easy to do because we had set up this data abstraction layer event data. We didn't have to implement any logic there around how this data is removed. Also, notice that the controller just doesn't even know or care about how that data actually gets removed, how that event object or event objects get removed from the application. It just calls event data, and then it's done. All right, so yeah, that's it.